Have you ever had an experience where you were trying to explain a situation and those you were explaining it to just did not understand what you were saying? That no matter how you tried to rephrase it, that no matter what you try, they just don't get what you're trying to say. Isn't it frustrating? Doesn't it drive you crazy? Our man born blind is living out that frustration of misunderstanding over and over through this passage. As outsiders, we can read this story and understand the man pretty quickly. We know who this Jesus guy is, so it isn't hard for us to get what happens. We read that Jesus mixed some spit into the dirt. Then he spread that mud over the man's eyes, told him to go wash, and then he regained his sight. Because we know other stories of Jesus' miraculous healing, this story doesn't immediately jump out as hard to believe. It fits in what we already have in our minds picture of who Jesus is. But following this miracle, what John gives us in this passage is a close look at how Jesus was understood by those who don't know him. And he does it through a series of encounters and interactions. The first encounter that we get is Jesus' encounter with the man born blind. This encounter begins with bad theology. His disciples ask if the man is blind because of his own sin, or if it's because of his parents' sin. But as Jesus tells us, it's neither. And we have to be careful with Jesus' reply, because he says that he was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him. George Stroup would remind us that Jesus is speaking about this specific man, not making a broad theological claim about salvation. That Jesus is about to reveal God's mighty work in this man by giving him sight. And with his newfound sight, the man returns to his community, and we see what the neighbors think of this mighty work. The man's neighbors aren't sure if he is actually the same man or not. Some think it might be, and some think it certainly is not the man. And through it all, the man is telling them it is him. And then we have the man with the Pharisees. When the neighbors don't agree that this was the man, they decide to take him to the leaders. And so the man tells the story for the second time. And now the Pharisees aren't sure if Jesus is working under God or if he's a sinner. When they ask the man, he tells them that Jesus is a prophet. And then the Pharisees try to bring in the man's parents instead of talking directly with him, but his parents just send them back to the man. And so they interrogate him for a second time, and the man finally comes to his wits' end. He tells them, "I have told you already, and you wouldn't listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples?" And the Pharisees are completely taken aback by this. They are disciples of Moses, they say. They're not disciples of some nobody walking around giving people sight. They see Jesus as a sinner for doing this on the Sabbath, and they don't want to be associated with Jesus at all. The man reminds them that they don't actually know anything about this Jesus guy, and he turns their argument on its head and explains that this feat, this miraculous work couldn't be done if Jesus was a nobody. This has never been done by anyone before, and so Jesus clearly must be from God. And then our last portion is of Jesus and the man again. we're told that Jesus finds the man after he's been driven out. The man has been through a lot. He had to explain what happened to him 3 times, and even then, the people didn't believe him. He knows what happened to him. He knows a man made him see, and in the end, he comes to know Jesus as the Son of Man. Through it all, the man accepts what has happened, even if he doesn't know the details. He isn't caught up in the why or the how of the situation. He isn't stuck wondering what he's supposed to do now. Unlike his neighbors and the spiritual leaders, he's okay with the change that has occurred. But from what we read, it seems that the community is not okay. The man in need is gone and has been transformed into someone who has experienced something incredible. His story is powerful, and people seem to be afraid of it. I think it all comes down to perspective. The man born blind is willing and ready to see. He is open to transformation and wonder. The community is closed off and looking to find a problem with what happened. They don't want to see the miracle for what it is. They want to nitpick Jesus' work to find fault in his actions. They want to see if he's working on the Sabbath, professing to be from God, or any other issue that will let them dismiss what has happened to the man. So I ask, which lens do you walk through life wearing? Do you wear a lens that shows you the wonder of God's works all around you? Or do you wear a lens that urges you to find problems with everything around you? We have a lot in our community and in our world that we could be doing better. And we have systems that really need to be changed or destroyed if we want justice for all of God's creation. So I'm not suggesting that we just put on rose-colored glasses and walk through life like nothing's wrong. I just wonder what it might be like if we first saw wonder and good, and only after appreciating and celebrating God's goodness did we ask questions of how things might be better. Being honest with ourselves, we have to ask, in what ways are we blind to God's work? We need to become aware of our own blindness so that we can be transformed and see the world in a new way, a way that requires us to understand another's perspective. Michael Linvall writes that blindness is not just not seeing. It is also not seeing everybody, the whole of truth, all the nuances of reality that can be seen only from perspectives outside the familiarity of our comfort zone. We can be transformed when we understand other perspectives and let them work in our hearts. Through this passage, the man born blind experiences transformation in his understanding of Jesus and what has happened. In each retelling of his story, the man uses stronger and stronger language to describe who Jesus is. One commentator tells us, in a sense, the blind man becomes a disciple as he gradually sees who Jesus is and testifies through a progression of professions, from the man called Jesus to a prophet to a man from God. He only interacts with Jesus at the very beginning in the very end of the story. And yet, it seems that God is still working in the man through each telling of his story. Every time he shares his experiences, his faith grows. The not-so-fancy church word we use these days to describe what the man is doing is called testimony. And testimony might be one of those words that you hear about other churches doing. But if we take a look at this story, we see that it's already a part of our lives. All the man born blind is doing is sharing an experience that he had with the divine. We do that in this church all the time. All those mornings that we have a faith sharing in the service, all those times we've had members share stories and experiences during the sermon time, all those times we hear a story about God's work in our time for joys and concerns. Testimony is already a common practice in our community's faith life. When I was a young adult volunteer in Northern Ireland, it seemed to me that every person around me in the church I was serving had had some sort of incredible experience with the divine. People shared their stories of their conversion to Christianity. They shared about the night that everything changed for them. They shared about the conviction they felt to live life in a new way. And here I was, thinking I was getting ready to go to seminary and into ministry, but I didn't have a story like theirs. I hadn't had that kind of experience. I couldn't pinpoint a day in my life that I knew I wanted to be a Christian. But my site coordinator helped me to understand an alternate viewpoint. He shared that he didn't have one of those days either. He was a cradle Presbyterian and had been a pastor for decades. And he had seen a lot in his years in Northern Ireland and understood his experience with God to be in smaller increments spread all throughout the years. And that's where I see God too. I remember moments or people, events that occurred over the course of my life that helped me to know who God is. I know how intimidating it can be to share about our faith. Faith is one of the most honest and vulnerable parts of our lives. And in some ways, faith is one of the most complex things in our lives. We will never fully understand God and God's glory. Living in a very well-educated place, we can feel the need to be able to perfectly explain everything and answer any possible question that comes up. And trying to explain a moving experience to someone else can feel like we just had a stranger mix spit with dirt to make mud and put it on our eyes. One of the hosts of a lectionary podcast shares that sometimes we feel unable or unequipped to witness to God's glory. Perhaps we need simply share the good things God has done in our lives and leave the theology alone. It's okay if we don't know all the right words to say. It's okay if it takes us a few tellings of the story to let God fully work through us. The man born blind took a few tellings of the story to get to the point of acknowledging Jesus as the Son of Man. And so it might take us a few tellings of our faith experience, our encounter with God's mighty works, to come to know God in a new, deeper way. We just need to be willing to see the wonder and be willing to share our stories. Amen.